I would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name's Robert Whitelaw, and I am the Rebel Broker. Licensed real estate broker in the state of California. Member of the National Association of Realtors. But please, don't hold that against me. Welcome to Thursday, August 4th, 2016. We are almost to the weekend. Just a little more time left for you to try to get finished the things you were hoping to accomplish this week. I hope you're making good progress. I'm not, which I hate to admit. We can talk about that, I suppose, if anyone really wants to hear about it. My search for my own personal property, not going as I'd hoped. But given the news I've shared with you over the last few days, I'm actually optimistic. We'll see. And you know what? Yeah, you know what? I'm feeling a walk into the weeds coming. Before I get into the weeds, if you'd like to get in contact with me, the absolute best way to do that is through the website at www.therebelbroker.com. Click on Contact the Rebel Broker and send along any ideas, suggestions, observations, or questions that you might have, and I will be happy to respond. And of course, I am still encouraging all of my listeners to head on over to the website and click the button at the very tippy top of the page. Take this survey to support the show, or support the show by taking this survey. It says one of those two things. Either one will take you to the same place, and it's basically a demographic style survey of my audience. I believe it's 5 to 7 questions, quick and dirty, and I really do appreciate you taking the time out to provide that info. Yeah, you know, so much of, we've talked a lot about ways to approach the marketplace, even when things are nuts, right? Deals can still be found even when things are going nuts. And I think what I've been going through, this would have a lot more emphasis behind it if I could say I did this and it worked. I've done it before and it's worked in previous markets, but it's the idea of being persistent. Now, as you know, I've been talking about I've got two styles of searches going out to satisfy my own need for another property. One is to purchase a piece of land and build on it, which I think is still a great option. For me, the location of the land, though, is key, because this is not something for my long-term plans that I plan on living in forever. This is a property where, as a first step, I would build my home. If it's large enough, I would then build a second in-law quarters there, which is allowed by county law. But my goal is to keep this in an area that would make it just ridiculously rentable all the time, which means it's not going to be way, way off in the mountains. And it's not going to have a lot of elements to it that me as a landlord want to deal with on a particularly regular basis. So no lots of failure points, right? I don't think this is something we've talked about before, but I think it makes logical sense. I think maybe sitting down and thinking about it yourself, you'd think, okay, I want to have the least amount of trouble with a rental. And trust me, this does actually dovetail eventually into the subject I picked for today. It's about points of failure, right? Now, what's the absolute lowest number of points of failure that you can have with an investment property? Now, of course, if we're talking about rentals, and you're providing appliances, so you're providing, say, a refrigerator and a washer and a dryer and a dishwasher and a garbage disposal and toilets, of course, and sinks. Those are your points of failure in a broad sense, right? Plumbing issues, toilet issues, the dryer stops working. These are the kinds of things that you as a landlord can expect over the long haul to occasionally get a phone call about. But what about homes with additional stuff? What if the home you have has a well? What if the home you have has septic? What if the home you have, which is very rare, but I'm going to bring it up because my house has it, has a lift station on it, which basically means there's an underground cistern to one side of my house where there's a pump in it And as the wastewater accumulates, it then reaches a certain level, and then a pump kicks on and pumps all of that stuff uphill, because unfortunately the sewer in my area is uphill from my house. All right, so that's a lift station, and I'm responsible for it. And every 10 years, I gotta replace the pump, and that's like a $2,500 cost. But it's an additional complication, right? It's something I have to keep on my calendar, something I need to be aware of, and something I need to be proactive about, because if that goes out, I'm probably going to be liable to put my tenants up in a hotel until that thing's fixed. And the last time this thing went out, now it went out 3 years before it was supposed to go out. These things are supposed to last 10 years, and in my case, it went out 7. And the reason was because of abuse, right? I have 3 sons who, not being that I was not aware, were also putting kitty litter down the toilet. So that was causing more abrasion, which was wearing down the thing quicker, right? So there's a thing. So if you've got a tenant who does that, now you can ask a tenant not to do that, but who knows? The point is, it's another failure point, right? So put that on your checklist. Whenever you're looking at a property, try to get an idea of the failure points and figure out what it's going to take you over the course, and amortize these amounts over months, right? If you've got a thing, like I have a pump that I know is going to fail at least every 10 years. So I would put myself on a schedule of replacing it every 9, just so that I'm never in a position, and of course, again, it assumes that no one abuses the plumbing with stuff going down the pipes that shouldn't go. But this is based on the theory that I would much rather pay to replace the thing before it has failed and not have any issues with the plumbing in the house not working, rather than potentially having to put up my clients or my tenants in a hotel for as much as 6 days. Because once it goes out, they have to order the thing. In fact, one thing I had considered as an option is, when I hit year 8 or 9, to just buy the pump, to buy a new pump and leave it in the garage until that one failed, and then call the guys out to have them replace it. So there's ways you can do it. But so what I'm going to suggest isn't that you just avoid homes with potential issues, additional failure points, but analyze how much of a pain in the bottom it is for you to compensate for that failure point. So in my case, the pain in the butt is that at some interval, I will have a backup pump purchased and sitting in my garage waiting to get installed. Now, the downside of that is the warranty starts when you buy that pump, right? So if you buy it too much ahead of when you're planning on having to install it, there's an issue there potentially, right? Maybe you can you can find out if that would actually be the case with any service provider. I use the same service provider for all my stuff relating to that. So, whenever I need to know, when did we replace this, when did we do that, I know the guy to call. It's always the same guy. Having that kind of continuity with the service on a property that you're going to use as an investment is a huge time saver, by the way. I get that many of us want to pop open that phone book or get onto Google and find a new service provider who might save us $20 on that service call. But let me just suggest that you find a good one and stick with them, regardless of whether or not they might cost you a few extra bucks when they come out, simply because that continuity is going to pay off for you huge if you need to get someone who already knows the history of your setup and knows what you need. Okay, so in that area of concern about failure points, let's kind of rank property types with elevated failure points, right? Now, it would seem to me that the property with the absolute highest number of failure points would be a single-family residential home, right? You as the landlord are responsible for everything. Everything inside the house, everything outside the house, the yard work, driveways, cracked pavement, everything, right? Anything that could go wrong is your problem. Let's go to the other end of the spectrum. What would be the least? You as a landlord, what would be the least? Well, it would seem to me that a condo, you'd be obviously paying for the privilege of not having to to actually be worrying about these other things, right? You're going to pay X amount of dollars per month, and then the HOA association is going to handle the roof, exterior painting, maintaining the landscaping, all of this stuff. But on the upside, you don't have to worry about any of that junk. And also, a good chunk of your insurance is going to be things that are for the entire development. Oftentimes, earthquake insurance here in California. Oftentimes, earthquake insurance is included in the HOA dues. Liability insurance for all the common areas. I believe the one I just did also included flood insurance. I guess they were in some very mild potential for a flood zone thing, so there was flood insurance there for that HOA. So a lot of things will be covered, and you'll only have to get a lower level of expense relating to your insurance for your home. So there are definitely benefits, but I wanted to point out this one as a potentially attractive thing because up until now, I've never told you to buy condos. Or I've never suggested it was a good call. I've always suggested that if the numbers work and you're positive cash flow on any deal, it's a good deal to consider. But I've always put condos out there as sort of the least desirable for a lot of reasons. And some of them are very recent. For those of you who've only started listening to the show within the last week or two, you've already heard some of them. It's too much like apartment living in a lot of cases. At least the high-rise types, right? You can still have a home that the rest of the country would think of it as a townhouse where it looks like just similar houses right next to each other where you may share some wall space with your neighbors on either side. And most people here in California think of those as townhomes. But for the purposes of architecture, it may be a townhome, but for the purpose of legal organization, it would likely be it could be a condo. If it's a townhouse, you own the ground that it sits on, you own the structure itself going all the way up into the sky. If it's a condo, you just own the airspace enclosed by the living area. So for a lot of these HOAs where it's a condo organization, if there's pipe problems in the walls, it's part of the HOA's duties to repair that stuff. So the level of service that gets transferred, or the level of stuff that is annoying that needs to be dealt with, gets transferred over to being a burden on the HOA rather than being a burden on you. Now, do you need to coordinate with the HOA to make sure that stuff gets dealt with? Yeah, you do. Another problem that I've had with condos of some types, if a condo is a straight up apartment that was simply converted into a condo at some point. That was a very popular thing in the 70s and 80s, was to convert apartment complexes into condominiums. And for whatever reason, that aesthetic somehow held on so that you even got condo buildings built specifically to be condos that looked like apartments. Anyway, but that's another story. And you need to decide for yourself how you feel about investing in those style properties. But many condo-style properties now are not like that, even high-rise ones where there's multiple floors. It feels more like a home that just happens to be, like a single-family home that just happens to be organized as a condominium. And the reason I bring this up is because the popularity of condos is starting to increase. And other things that have always kind of bothered me about condos is that they tend to be the first to lose their value and the last to gain value in markets as they move. And we've absolutely seen that here in terms of the marketplace that we've had going through since 2008. But that's starting to change. It's changing with a lot of things for a lot of reasons. And one of the main drivers of the appeal is less about the appeal of the condo inherently and more to do with the price appeal of a condo. So that's sort of at the root, I think, of a lot of this newfound popularity, which concerns me because, again, remember, that is all a factor of the supply and demand thing we have going on right now, and it's not going to stay that way forever. The only thing I can guarantee you is that the real estate market will change, and there will come a time when it's not this lopsided. What happens to condos then? I still stand by my previous statements that condos tend to be the least desirable style of property to purchase. And at the absolute end of that spectrum of worst is the condo that simply feels like an apartment that's been converted into a condo. Now, and that is not the condo that I've talked about a couple of times on a few shows since I sold it. When I sold that about a month and a half ago, that home didn't feel like a condo at all. It was 2 stories, 2 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, and a beautiful place. It felt a lot more like a townhome, so it felt more homey than that feeling you get from the low ceilings and crampedness of an apartment-style living situation. But right now, this particular article I'm referring to gets that the affordability is one of the huge reasons why condos are seeing a resurgence. But one problem with condos is that it's been harder for buyers to get approved to purchase unless they had a larger down payment. And that's because the Federal Housing Administration, which is, I'm sad to say, it's unfortunate, is a large source for first-time home buyers. It's a government-backed program. It requires as little as 3.5% down and are often a solution for buyers who have less than perfect credit. So historically, the FHA only approved a small number of condos for their financing. So one big thing, and one thing that absolutely affected the price, and here's an interesting thing to note, FHA-approved condominium complexes tended to have higher prices on average than non-FHA condo-approved. So is that good or is it bad? Is the influence of that FHA approval skewing prices like that a good thing for the market in general or a bad thing for the market in general? I think that's an interesting point, one we could argue about probably. In my opinion, it's generally not as good a thing. But there are condos, many condo developments were simply no-go for FHA because of issues relating to how many people who lived in there that weren't residents. In other words, folks bought these and rented them out. And once that reached a certain percentage, then the FHA would no longer loan. They had to have a certain amount of money in reserve. There couldn't be litigation. There's a variety of different things. And it's an HOA thing as well. So there's these things that they have to qualify for so that FHA will be willing to lend. Now, here's the interesting part, and here's kind of what inspired the show tonight. Now, President Obama signed H.R. 3700, the Housing Opportunity Through Modernization Act. Let's see. NAR, the National Association of Realtors, has been an advocate of the bill for a super long time, testifying before Congress and lobbying for its passage. Yay. Passed unanimously by Congress, the bill lowers the owner occupancy requirement for condo complexes from 50% to 35%. So now only 35% of occupants have to be owners. That's a huge change. And it opens a gigantic door now to lending where ultimately you're on the hook for the loaned amount. More, according to the article, quote, that means more condos could be purchased with a 3.5% down payment, well below the usual 10 or 20% requirement. Let's see. FHA does have 90 days to devise their new rules on owner occupancy, or the 35% owner occupancy rate goes into effect. In the meantime, let's take a look at some of the pros and cons of condo ownership. So they kind of lay it out. A pro that they have here is no exterior maintenance. If you're looking for a lock and key lifestyle, or if you just don't have a great green thumb, that's a great bonus for you. One con is somebody's got to do the maintenance, which probably means you'll pay a homeowners association fee. I've never seen a condo HOA where you didn't pay a fee. So, yeah, at least where I am, that's the way it works. One other pro, if you have an HOA, you probably also have some amenities in the community, like a pool or a gym, that you may not have in a single-family home. One con that they go along with here is you still have to pay for the amenities even if you don't use them, and HOA fees are not tax deductible. We're going to go ahead and take a quick break right there. We'll be back in a minute with some more pros and cons on buying a condominium. So stay right there. Are you ready to jump in and start your search for your first investment property? Maybe you've decided that it's time to own your own home, or maybe you're ready to sell your home and move on to something new. No matter what your goal is, the Rebel Broker can help. That's right, aside from hosting this show, I am also the owner-broker of Whitelaw & Sons Real Estate Services right here in Silicon Valley. With over 25 years experience serving Silicon Valley, Morgan Hill, San Martin, and Gilroy, I or one of my great agents can help you achieve your goals in real estate. So if you're ready to look into taking that next step towards achieving your real estate goals, point your browser at www.soldbyrobert.com. That's www.soldbyrobert.com and get in touch. Let me show you how I will earn your business and your respect. Again, that's www.soldbyrobert.com, or you can call me at 408-852-0525. California Bureau of Real Estate ID 00984-909. Welcome back. We are continuing our chat about condominiums, kind of a transition in the marketplace from something that I would automatically discount in an awful lot of ways, unless it met certain architectural criteria, right? And if it didn't have that condo feel, I would absolutely consider a property that's organized as a condo, but doesn't feel architecturally like a condo. And in my head, I'm not sure everyone thinks the same thing I think when I say the word condo, thinking of it in the most derogatory term. And that is, as I said before, a thing that feels like an apartment that has just been reorganized as a condominium for you to own it instead of renting it. So as we left off, we were talking about one of the cons, which is you still have to pay for amenities even if you don't use them, and also that HOA fees are not tax deductible, which is kind of a bummer. One pro, according to this article, is if you do use the amenities, you might meet some neighbors, which could make living in your condo even more enjoyable. Sometimes close quarters create great bonds, and sometimes it annoys the heck out of you. So I think that's a 50-50 shot right there, depending on where your situation is. Another con they list, sometimes close quarters just translates to a lot of noise. That is one problem. Condos, you're sharing walls with people. One reason why I always prefer an end unit, simply because at that point you're really only sharing one wall, unless it's a multi-story and you're in a middling floor, and then you've got people above you, below you, and to one side of you. Those who are buying for the first time, moving down, or simply looking to own something of their own at the lowest possible price might not mind so much. Still, the idea of going from an apartment to something that still feels like one can be disconcerting. And we've touched on that, and I think that's huge. I know when I moved from apartment living to not apartment living, it was awesome. The difference was huge. It was everything I could have hoped and dreamed. I was very pleased, and I think people want that. They getting to enjoy a little peace and quiet in your own place, I think, is what folks are looking for when they're buying. One pro they list here is even with the drawbacks, a condo you buy is still something you own, and the benefits of owning real estate are many, like pride of ownership to start, not to mention the tax benefits. If you've never owned property before, you'll love being able to write off your mortgage interest, which on average is about $1,900 a year in savings. According to MarketWatch, plus any points on your mortgage, property taxes, and private mortgage insurance, which you'll need if you're putting less than 20% down. The next con on their list is even if the new law results in greater availability of condos, making them more attractive and more viable to buyers, condos are still traditionally more difficult to sell than single-family homes. This is absolutely true. I don't remember if we covered this at the beginning of the show, but if you've been listening to the show for a while, you know that the meat and potatoes of real estate searches, at least in my area, is 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. That is where, if you were to plot this stuff out as a graph, that's where the big bulge is. That's where the top of the graph is. That's where everybody's searching. And 2-bedroom, as soon as you just put 2 bedrooms instead of 3, you are way down at a lower number of buyers that are out there looking for that kind of property. So it can take longer to sell depending on your timeline. If you're trying to get out of there fast, you may have to trade money for time. That's typically the way it works. If you want to hold out for what the market will bear, you need to understand that it's what the market will bear given the time available. So if you're someone who's got 6 months before you even have to worry about it, well, you know what? The odds are you'll probably sell it and you've got a good market going on in your area. You'll probably be able to sell it for what you're hoping for or what the numbers say you should be able to get for it, but you may have to wait for that. If you need to get out, if you're purchasing another property and you got to be out by a certain date, those types of things. If there's some sort of time crunch, you have to be on the job in another state, whatever it may be, you may have to more aggressively price that property to move it, whereas with a single-family residential home, there would be less worry about doing that. Now, clearly, in some places, that would be the case anyway. You might have a lower market in everything where you are, but in general, in whatever market you pick, your single-family residential is going to be doing better than a condo. Let's see. Quote, if there are empty units in your building, those are likely going to sell first. And if there are a lot of empty units, good luck. Also, condominiums often appreciate in value much slower than single-family homes. This is because you don't own any land, which is the biggest drive for appreciation. Instead, you only own the living space. There's a big difference. Very true. That's one reason why I think if I'm ever looking really at condos, and I do own a condo, despite the fact I poo-poo the condo, I do own one as a vacation rental. So would I want to live there? Well, it's freaking Hawaii. So, yeah. Would I want to live there forever? No. In all honesty, I can see a point within the next 5 to 10 years where I just might move myself over there and live in that thing for a year just to do it. But I would definitely come back and get myself a single family residential thing. And one of those main reasons would be I know so many of the people who do live there. Not sure I could stand it for more than a year. Anyway, another pro. I shouldn't have said that. Who knows if one of my neighbors over there listens to this show? And now I'm going to have explaining to do. Pro, but see, none of them know which one I'm talking about, right? So I win. Pro, if you're in the area where single-family homes are out of reach for many or most buyers and condos are your one shot at home ownership, you might not care that it could be harder to sell someday, and it might not even be an issue in your area. Your realtor should be able to advise you on the neighborhoods that are best buys. So this is also a very important thing to understand, that the location and the market and how things are going are absolutely huge in determining how lucrative your condo could potentially be. You know, a condo sitting down here in Morgan Hill is not going to be as lucrative as a condo near Santana Row up in San Jose. Santana Row is I'm being a little generous here. I'm being a little generous. Is like the Rodeo Drive of San Jose or the Rodeo Drive of Silicon Valley. And I'm sure someone who knows the area is going to say, no, you're thinking of Palo Alto, where the mall is, and that's the Rodeo Drive of Northern California. But they've actually got some shops in Santana Row that are the same kinds of shops that they have on Rodeo Drive in Hollywood, or in Beverly Hills. So anyway, in that area, if you have condos in highly sought after locations, of course you're going to do better. Because the demand is like tide that raises all boats, right? Single-family residentials are going to benefit huge. Condos are going to benefit as well, maybe not as much, but still enough that it's not going to hurt if you own one to have to think about selling it. Let's see. Con, you could have to pay an assessment. Okay, this is a good one because I've had to pay assessments. Assessment, quote, is the bad word of any planned community because it means money out of your pocket. And that's also why when you buy a condo, you want to very much evaluate what's going on with that condo. How much of a reserve do they have? And what on their list of things they plan to have to spend money on, right? So if you've got a condo and they have a plan, you should be able to tell from the notes, when's the next time they have to replace the roof? When's the next time they have to do overhauls of various things? When's the next time they have to replace air conditioning, assuming that there's centralized air conditioning and the HOA takes care of it? Whatever stuff they take care of, you look at the service history of that and when things are expected to fail, and they should have cost estimates associated with that. And then how much do they have in reserve, or how much do they budget to have in reserve by the time that happens? If they have very little reserve, well, when the time comes to get the work done, there may be a special assessment, which would mean that each unit would have to cough up a certain amount of money to handle the repairs that need to be done. Let me give you an example of an unexpected one that was okay with me because of the result. Again, this is the condo in Hawaii, and you may not be aware of this, but land ownership is funky as all get out in Hawaii. There are a number of families that date back to Captain Cook and the royal family of Hawaii that own various chunks of the land, and a lot of it is beachfront property. Their descendants now are a number in the hundreds, so there's tons and tons of these descendants, and these are not like the folks that you saw in that movie with what's his name from Ocean's 11. Can't remember the guy's name. Everyone's going to laugh at me that I can't remember this guy's name. Anyway, it tends to be an awful lot of folks who not everybody in that family is rich, right? So there comes a point where they say, all right, it's time for us to sell this land. We all want to pull some profit out. And as part of the agreement that my HOA had with the landowners was we got first right of refusal. So if they wanted to try to sell the land, we, the homeowners of the Pats at Poonaloo, got to get right of first refusal to purchase the land. And they tried to sell it to someone else. We sued them, yada, yada. End result is we had to come up with X amount of millions of dollars as an HOA to buy this land. If I'm not mistaken, I had to write a check for something like $6,000 to just for my section to buy the land that we sat on. However, once we did that, the resale price, the value of my unit went from something in the neighborhood of $60,000 to closer to $200,000 because we now owned the land. So that was a no-brainer. So coming up with that money was at the time a little bit of a struggle, but it was something worth doing and worth sacrificing for because of the amount of value. It's like, if someone said, hey, would you like to trade $6,000 of cash for $140,000 in equity? I think you might say yes. I know I did. So that's what we did in that situation. But that's an assessment. It's in one that if there isn't enough money already in the fund that's used for different things that come up as a fund to do repairs and regular maintenance, well, then guess what? There has to be a special assessment. So that's what it's talking about. Quote, before buying your condo, you should request and read the documents that apply to the management of the complex. That's the HOA docs. What are the hot issues for this complex? How big is the condominium's reserve fund? We just talked about that. You need to get a sense of whether the condominium you're considering is well run, whether the rules and restrictions would allow you to live the lifestyle you're seeking, and whether the building complex is experiencing any problems that could hurt the value your share of ownership the value of your share of ownership in the future. So obviously reviewing the homeowners association documents, and that's a standard part of the process of the purchase, right? So what do we do about this? I think that condos can be a important part of anyone's investment strategy. I'd be a hypocrite if I said it's not, because I've done it, and it's working exceptionally well for me right now. But I think you need to be exceptionally careful, and the math really needs to work up front, and you need to give yourself a buffer to account for things that are out of your control. Because remember, increases in HOA fees are beyond your control. You can vote on it as a member of as an owner member, but odds are it's just going to happen. So in fact, the board can just pass it. And I know that last time that we had an increase in dues, it was done by the board without there being a general vote of all the residents. So that's just going to happen. And that's something you should budget for yourself long term if you're doing a projection on what your costs are for any property that you're going to rent. And that's something you should absolutely pass directly on to your renters if the timing works. I know that some states have interesting laws and rules relating to how much you can raise rent and all these other types of things, but you need to make sure to cover yourself in case those things come up. So what's the takeaway from this? Well, if you're someone who has always ignored condominiums, I'm going to suggest that you consider it as a possibility. I know that in my search, I am now including condominiums in my search for possible properties for me even to live in. But I'm looking for that very special kind of condo. I'm not going to buy the kind that feels like an apartment for a couple of reasons. I don't want to live in a place like that. And frankly, I think it would be ridiculously hard to rent down the road because when choosing between a place to rent or a place to buy, if they see no actual value of life difference between the two, why bother buying it? Why not just stay in that apartment, right? So avoid that. Make sure it's got value because I know down the road, I'm not going to be living in it and I'm going to be wanting to rent it. So it needs to be attractive. All right, folks, thanks for listening. I am absolutely thankful that you go to the trouble of making this show part of your everyday routine. Thank you very much for that. As always, thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you all next time.